Hey everybody, this is Kyle, aka Vulcan Wolverine. Um, as you see, I'm not going to Florida today because of Tropical Storm Barry. I don't know why we're not going because it seems like it's like I'll show you guys. Well, yeah, I guess I'll talk about this while some people come into chat. If you are coming into chat, welcome. I hope that you're getting through this all right. If you're a targeted individual, I hope you're staying strong. I'm getting hit really hard. My attackers, I guess they were basing, they were kind of going with that I was going to go to Florida, and so they were hitting me extremely hard during these last couple of days. But now it turns out that Tropical Storm Barry, which is maybe a hurricane when it hits Louisiana, it's coming right through where I live here. So I don't know. But anyway, my family did. We're pushing back that trip to the end of the month, which is going to be trouble because I need to get ready to go to TI Day. So anyway, but let me show just real quick and welcome anybody in the chat. I'm going to go ahead. Let me open up my chat room real quick. Got some extremely important information. I put it out yesterday. Thank you, Ashley, for sending it to me. It's the SoftWorks thing. It's the Donovan group, Donovan Radical Speakers group, and they had like four experts speaking on neuroweapons, radio frequency weapons, microwave weapons, and things like that. Um, and I posted it yesterday, but I'm not sure how many people saw it. So I do want to go through. I'm going to go through James Giordano's presentation today, and hopefully I'll jump right into it as people start coming into chat. I kind of just want to get into the information. And hey, Lewis. Hey, Native. Hey, Future. Hey, Joe. Hey, Meerkat. How are you doing, Meerkat? Oh, how are you guys doing? So Meerkat asked, when and where is TI Day? So TI Day is August the 29th. So everybody mark your calendars. TI Day is August the 29th, and there are going to be rallies and protests all over the globe. So I heard from Shane Gibbs that they're doing a protest in front of the BBC. There's going to be a huge rally in Oregon. There's going to be a huge rally in New York. There's going to be a huge rally in Florida. There's going to be a rally in California, and then there's probably going to be other rallies all over the world, which I don't know. I don't know about all of them. The ones that I know for sure are the one that Shane Gibbs is talking about for everybody in the UK in front of the BBC, and then the one that I plan on going to. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'm planning on going to the Oregon rally. So TI Day, August 29th, just rallies everywhere. There's going to be rallies in a bunch of different states. I think Oregon is the big one. Like Oregon is the really big rally. Freedom for Targeted Individuals is putting that together. I'm not sure everybody who's putting that together, but I know Ella and Dr. Matt, maybe Shayla, and some people are putting that together. I'll get the list of people who are organizing it. But that's probably the one that I'm going to try to. And I think they're trying to put something together in Texas too. But I'm not sure about that. I really wanted to go to the Oregon one to meet Ella and Matt, and to also live stream it too. I really want to live stream the whole thing. But yeah. I'm gonna do what I'll do. I'm gonna get to this information, guys, because I really want to. I probably won't be talking much in chat, but I did want to do a live stream so you guys could, just talk and chat if you wanted to during this information. But I think like probably tomorrow, what I'll do is I'll do a short video. I'm gonna get all the information for all the conference calls, and I know I put information for the conference calls on previous videos, but I'm gonna get all the information for all the conference calls during the week. And then there's actually a conference call for TI Day planning, that you can go to. So I'm going to get a list of all that. I'm going to make a video on it and give you all that information on the conference calls, and then put a list of the conference calls in the description. so we can all have that. And if you just go, if you like go to some of Ella's calls, you can find out a lot more information about TI Day rallies. But we all need to try and get to a rally near you. We really need a push on this one, because I think everything is really snowballing in a good way. But guys, I really do want to get to this information, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think you guys know about this, but I put the link in the description. Now, this is a let me go to it real quick. This is a presentation. I guess SoftWorks is the organization that put on these presentations, and they had 4 speakers. And see, it's SoftWorks J5, Donovan Group, Radical Speaker Series, Neuroweapons. And this guy did a presentation, then James Giordano, then another expert, is like an expert in radio waves, radio frequencies, I guess. And then another guy at the end, which I'm going to do another video on the last presentation. But I do want to start out. This is a 30-minute presentation by James Giordano. He says so much super important stuff. So I wanted to do a commentary on it, because when he's talking about, when James Giordano is talking about neuroweapons, well, you'll see how he talks about it. And he has to talk about it in a way where he's framing it as if the United States, so he's framing it as if the Cuban embassy attack happened, right? And he's framing it as if the United States called on him to tell him what it was that happened there. So in all these guys, you'll hear them kind of dance around it and talk around it, but they can't come right out and say the United States and the DoD is experimenting on innocent citizens in America, you know. But they know that. These people know that, but because it's a national security issue, and it's the highest classification that they're doing this, they have to kind of act like this is some kind of mystery, and then present like, oh, well, it could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this, right? But he says a lot of important stuff. He knows about neuroweapons. He knows about neuroweapons experimentation. He knows about directed energy weapons experimentation. So this one's really important, guys. So I want to go through. I want to kind of get it started, because it is a 30-minute presentation. And that storm. Let me show y'all real quick before I start it. Let me show y'all this, guys. I was going to live updates. Live Tropical Storm Barry is coming to Louisiana, where I live. And check this out. So this is the path of the storm right here. I live right here. Like, I live like right on this kind of corner right here. I live in Baton Rouge. And so it's coming right through my city. It's really sunny today. It's like raining in certain parts of the city. But where I am, like right where I am, clouds are kind of gathering. But there's a huge storm coming. So I got to kind of get ready for that. I thought I'd be going to Florida. I was a little bit relieved. Like, a little percentage of me was relieved, because I'm getting tortured so bad. And it's uncomfortable being around my family like that, but I still love them. But a major part of me was very disappointed, that I'm not going to be able to go to Florida. I mean, they're not going. They're going to reschedule the trip for the end of the month, but I'm not sure, because I've got to really try and get my butt to the rally in Oregon, or if there's a rally in I'm not sure, but I'm going to a rally. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I will do it. So let's get started, guys. I just want to show you all this presentation, and I'm going to kind of stop it on very important things he says. But he talks about it as if the United States is trying to figure out what this is, but the United States knows very well. The DoD, the Pentagon, and the DoD, they know very well what happened at the Cuban embassy. The Cuban embassy attack, but they have to present it in a way where it's like, oh, this is a mystery. It's probably some, it's probably some neuroweapons. It's neurotech, but they act like they're looking at it from the other side. When the United States, the DoD, the Pentagon and the DoD are using these weapons, are manufacturing these weapons, are advancing these weapons, and experimenting on us. All these contractors and subcontractors under the DoD are experimenting on us, with hospitals and universities collaborating with them. So let's get this started, guys, because it is 30 minutes, and I kind of want to talk about it a little bit.
First and foremost, I want to thank Lieutenant Colonel Snow for inviting us.
So embassy encephalopathy, induced hearing loss, cognitive dysfunction, which I just experienced reading that word, cognitive dysfunction, and neuropathological changes, possible causes, mechanisms, and effects. So James G. Adorno, PhD, Department of Neurology and Biochemistry, Georgetown University Medical Center, Washington, D.C., USA. And so if you guys have followed my videos for a while, I've done a lot of videos on James G. Adorno because he is the advisor on neurotechnology and neuroweapons to the Pentagon. Really neuroscience and neurotechnology, but anything with neurotechnology is dual use, which means it has medical things that it can be used for. It has some consumer uses it can be used for, and then it can be used for good things. It can be used to help people to do certain medical things, but then it can also be used for really, really bad stuff. So that's what dual use means there. So let's go ahead and I'll probably be stopping it quite a lot. Hopefully not, but there's some really, really important stuff that he says in here.
Esteemed colleagues, Drs. Huffer, Balaban, Canton, thanks very much to Softworks for having us down. We'll be back here again in January to spend some time with you. By training, I'm a neuropathologist. I've been doing neuroscience for about 38 years. Very often my colleagues like to call me, and jokingly we addressed this morning, a disruptive neuroscientist, because I work in the area primarily of the way neuroscience can be utilized for a variety of different purposes, not all of them medical. And certainly on the medical side, you can do two things. You can help or you can harm. You can withdraw certain types of care and that can be harmful, or the very same things that work on a biological and physiological system through a variety of different anatomical sites can be inductive of things that are at least burdensome, if not threatening and harmful. And that's probably what we've got here. So as you heard from Dr. Hoffer, he got a call early in 2017 that said, this is the Department of State, we've got a problem. In the middle of 2017, I got a call from the Department of State, said, Dr. Giordano, we've got a question. And the question is, what do you think we're doing here? What do you think we've got here? We've got this set of findings, and apparently this is going to be some type of problematic issue. My work is fairly well known. For the term neuroweaponology, back in 2006 and 2007, we developed a paradigm by which neuroscience can be weaponized, and we assessed that on the world stage. 2008, the National Academy's National Research Council came back and said, yeah, brain science really is not ready for prime time. That was a misnomer. Our work in 2009-10 and the work of the Nuffield Council in 2013 demonstrated that not only was brain science viable and of value to be weaponized, but in many cases it was already being weaponized based upon older technology that was now taking updates and being put increasingly into a variety of circumstances.
So you hear that? He was saying, like, in 2006, they said, oh, brain science is not viable to be weaponized. And we all know that's a lie, because people have been being experimented on with neuroweapons, with V2K, with directed energy weapon systems, since like the 1950s. I think the V2K pretty much was perfected. Well, not perfected, but it came about in like the 1970s, and they've been experimenting on a lot of people hardcore since the 1970s. So James G. Adorno just went ahead and told a big truth there. They've been doing this stuff for a long time, and then they take newer advancements of the weapons, right? Newer advancements coming out in like the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. But not only was neuroscience viable, it's been used for a long time. So he went ahead and told the truth on that one right there. And you got to know that if anybody's using neuroweapons, which this is the thing that's just mind-boggling to me. They're trying to make it out like terrorists in the world have these weapons, bad actors have these weapons, and people don't think that the biggest countries in the world, like Russia, China, the UK, America, Israel, don't have access to neurotechnologies and neuroweapons. I mean, that's a joke. That's a joke right there. So I mean, he does. He kind of, I don't know. I don't know what to think of James Giordano. I know that he knows about this and isn't saying anything. It does seem like they're trying to get a little bit of it. They're trying to say as much as they can, though. So we just got to use that. I think I'm remaining neutral, and I'm just going to be happy with the information we can get from James Giordano right now. My first instinct is to be very angry at him. And why are you not coming out? So many people are being tortured by this stuff. You know, the torture is just so excruciating, psychologically and physically. And I can't believe that, you know, these people that know about it, you know, I think they don't speak about it because then their families could be in danger. They might be targeted. They might be put in jail, right? I think Robert Duncan can only talk about certain things. He knows more than he's written about, but if he talks about things, you know, that he signed a waiver for, you know, he could be put in prison for a long time. Or the way that this stuff works out, and the way that these agencies and organizations are doing things, like under the DoD, under the CIA, under the DIA, you know, he could be killed for coming out and saying things that are that he agreed not to talk about.
Circumstances that would yield individuals to be in harm's way. We're beginning to see a little bit more of this.
Oh, I want to play that again because that's an important part. Because he's talking about us right here. This is where he talks about us.
Issue. My work is fairly well known for the term neuroweaponology. Back in 2006 and 2007, we developed a paradigm by which neuroscience could be weaponized, and we assessed that on the world stage. 2008, the National Academy's National Research Council came back and said, yeah, brain science really is not ready for prime time. But that was a misnomer. Our work in 2000.
So misnomer means lie. Like misnomer is like a nice little propaganda word for lie. They lie.
2009-10 and the work of the Nuffield Council in 2013 demonstrated that not only was brain science viable and of value to be weaponized, but in many cases it was already being weaponized based upon older technology that was now taking updates and being put increasingly into a variety of circumstances that would yield individuals to be in harm's way. We're beginning to see a little bit more.
Y'all heard that, right? It's putting individuals in harm's way. Neurotechnology, neuroweapons are being utilized all over the world, putting individuals in harm's way. Now, what he's referring to up front, he's referring to the embassy workers, the Cuban embassy workers. But what he is inferring, which maybe he means to infer, maybe he's check this out, guys. This guy is very careful about how he talks. He weighs his words in his presentations very carefully. And I think he might actually on purpose try and slip some things out about us, about innocent people all over the world who are being tortured by this stuff, who our lives are being disrupted, but not only disrupted, you know, they're trying to destroy our lives. They're trying to destroy our brains, our nervous system, and stuff like that. But he just said it there. These weapons are being used, proliferated so much, and many people are being put in harm's way from them. So it's just a definitive proof.
More of this, and perhaps this is what we're seeing here. I want to start out with that premise because I'm not going to point any fingers. I'm not going to make any accusations. However, what I want to do is I work with two things: the explicit findings.
Aha, very clever. Very clever, James. Okay, I'll stop. I really want to get through this information. It's serious information, but you know how he says, well, I'm not going to point any fingers. I'm not going to talk about who's doing it. It's a very clever way to not have to mention how the DoD and the Pentagon, you know, work with these weapons. They work with contractors that manufacture them. They work with contractors, hospitals and universities that do research, that do training, research, and development with them.
And the implications those findings give rise to, particularly in light of the fact that by 2014, the National Academies and National Research Council reconvened and demonstrated that not only were the brain sciences viable, but they were in fact of high value and were in use globally as neuroweapons. Characteristically, when we take a look at neuroweapons, what we think of is drugs, bugs, toxins, and devices. Not all of these things will work directly in the brain. Very often they will work on the peripheral nervous system or on the neurosensory organs to then have a feedback effect that are going to disrupt the process of cognition, emotion, and behavior. What I want you to remember is that these are not weapons of mass destruction. These are weapons of mass disruption.
Now, guys, that's a very important thing that he's saying. This guy is an expert in neurotechnology. And he's an expert, by default, he's an expert in neuroweapons because, dual use neurotechnology can be used for good medical applications, for evil. I would say evil because we're targeted individuals. We're innocent people being, tortured by this stuff. And I forgot what I was going to say. I'm getting hit really hard, guys. I was going to put this off until I felt better, but if you do that, you just wait forever. I can't remember what. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on with it.
Disruption can be on the level of the individual and then creating a ripple effect.
Oh, okay, yeah. Weapons of mass disruption. So you guys probably hear me saying that a lot. So with this guy being an expert on neuroweapons, that's an important term, and we see that a lot. Like we see that amongst the TI community. People not trusting each other, or people, they can amp up our paranoia and stuff like that. They disrupt our, our relationships with our family and friends, and that's the whole point of a lot of this experimentation. To collect data, yes, on the brain and the nervous system, but to also see how much they can disrupt people, how much they can disrupt somebody's thinking. I mean, they're disrupting my thinking, giving this presentation. It's really a mirror inside of a mirror here, because I'm a targeted individual. My attackers are disrupting my memory, so that I sound like, so that I'm not presenting, I'm presenting the information well, so I'll forget things, and people will go, oh man, this guy, his brain's not working really well, so they may think the information is less important than it is. But it's a good example just right here, me making this video. My attackers are, hitting me with V2K and memory disruption and, torturing my nervous system while I'm trying to present this information. So weapons of mass disruption is a very important term. And this guy knows a lot about neuroweapons.
In their cohorts, but on larger scales, socioeconomic scales, geopolitical scales, military scales. Keeping that in mind, it's very, very important to determine a pattern of use, with the implication being that something's going on here. And this was probably, very probably, not an incidental event. Now, could it have been? Yes, absolutely. What is the likelihood of that? Think about it. So if we're talking about...
So when he says, it could have been an incidental event, which he, kind of waves off, that means like a one-off. Like, oh, this is just a weird coincidence. It's just a one-off. It's like a one-time thing. It's a weird situation. But he's saying, no, that's not the case. This is happening everywhere. This kind of situation is happening all over the globe to many people. So he's saying this is really... It's not like the norm or anything. Not everybody on the globe is experiencing it, but it's a situation. These weapons are being used in many situations. The Cuban embassy attack just being one of those situations. And then you look at the China consulate attack, just one situation. But those two incidents are like a small percentage, a super like 0.00001%, 0.001% of everyone who's being hit with these weapons and affected by these weapons.
Things that go bump in your brain, there's a lot of different ways to get into your brain. The primary findings, as you heard from Dr. Hoffer, were primarily otological findings and vestibular findings, things that happen in the ear. And there are two terms I think that become important for you to understand. The first is the idea of otopathology, which is there's something wrong there. And the second is that this may be due to some toxic event. The initial thought was perhaps these individuals were exposed to some compound, either an environmental compound or an intentional compound, that then caused some type of pharmacological or chemical damage to to the organs of the inner ear, whether that organ was the hearing organ, the cochlea, or the organs of balance and orientation, which are the semicircular canals, the saccule and the ampule. There are a number of different drugs that could do this. So we know that there are certain things that we'll call damage to the ear, structural damage to the ear, a blow, a pressure wave. There are certain drugs that can create a toxic effect in the ear, all components of the ear. And what these will then do is they'll affect a variety of the components, inclusive of the nerve that emanates from the ear and goes into the spiral ganglion and then up into the brain. So the idea of an ear-brain connection is not foreign to this type of otopathology and ototoxicity.
And he's going to go into this, guys, but this is so important. It's why I say vestibular system a lot. Now, there's two ways this happens with us, I think. He's going to actually, like, later on, I've got to stop it when he does this in the presentation. But so with electromagnetic frequencies, they can go in through the outer ear to the inner ear to the brain, right? Like these electromagnetic frequencies conduct along the skin into the ear, the outer ear, then to the inner ear. And in the inner ear is, and then he said ganglia, something, I forgot the term he used, but it's a pathway to the brain. Now it can they also do, the microwave hearing, the V2K, which is a signal to the brain. It's a microwave signal to the brain, which is then translated to the inner ear. So I think a lot of us, I know that my attackers, they're coming in both ways. They're sending a signal to the brain, to the inner ear, but they're also coming in the other way. They're also coming in with an electromagnetic field or stream of energy to the skin that conducts along, goes through the outer ear to the inner ear to the brain. So it's like they're coming in from two ways like that. And there's other protocols also, but I'll tell you guys when he gets to the part of it, something that I learned from Dave Case, who is a genius, I think, just he confirms it. James Giordano with this presentation really confirms that we are getting electromagnetic streams or fields that are conducting along the skin and that enter through the eyes and the ears, because that's the vestibular system and their pathways to the brain. That's why grounding is super important, because it's going to make the skin less conductive. And then obviously, I know you guys have heard it a million times. I'll probably say it a trillion. Dave Case's CD, because Dave Case took into account that they were coming in through the pathway of the outer ear, inner ear, brain, right? Conduct along the skin to the outer ear, to the inner ear, and then the brain.
What are the various signs and symptoms? Hearing loss, tinnitus, vertigo, disequilibrium, and nausea. Visual features such as nystagmus and oscillopsia, which you heard earlier, and then certainly a whole different types of headache and or disruption of cranial functions. In other words, not only headache, but facial pain, unusual sensations, and then a loss of attentiveness and cognitive functions that can be accompanying this. Next slide, please. What type of things can do this? What type of agents could do this? Well, certainly if we take a look at just defining these into two major categoricals, we have drugs and devices. The drugs that could do this I have listed for you. The likelihood of this being a drug-induced event is very, very low. The reason for that is that the drugs would have to be given repeatedly. Characteristically, it'd have to be given either spike doses that would have another host of effects we call a constellation of effects. This would be notable, and you wouldn't tend to see uniform effects based upon the way the drugs were given. In other words, drugs being given in different doses at different times might manifest distinct effects in different people, and would also not have this particular pattern of presentation. So we can take the drugs and say of those that we would see, probably most notably those that are anti-tumor drugs like cisplatin and carboplatin, and probably the organic solvents.
Hey guys, I just want to stop it real quick. I can see, I've got my tablet open, so I can see what y'all are typing in chat, so I can read y'all's comments. But I think with this presentation and then the next one that I go through, I do want to keep it short. Since it's such important information, especially if some non-targeted individuals come in and watch this, I do want to keep it short. So what I might do is go over these two presentations. Y'all can chat in the chat room and stuff like that. And then after I do these two presentations this weekend, go through these two presentations this weekend, I'll probably do a live stream where we can just chat and I'll talk to you guys to make up for not. But I see that you guys are putting some very, very good comments that I would usually read. So I just want to let y'all know, I'm just, want to really get through this important information and kind of make it as succinct as possible.
Once again, these drugs are highly toxic. There'd be no way these individuals would present with this symptom alone and not present with another cascade or constellation of symptoms that would be indicative of exposure to these agents, which then brings us down to the idea of devices. What type of things could it be? Well, it could be subsonic stimulation. It could be sonic.
Or it could be, and I hear these guys, I hear these experts, and even people at the Directed Energy Summit. It's always at the tail end. It's always at the tail end that they say, "Oh yeah, and high-powered microwaves." Or James G. Adorno just now said, "Yeah, it could be subsonic or ultrasonic, combination of both, or electromagnetic pulses or microwave." They always kind of say it at the end right there. But that's what targeted individuals are dealing with. However, we probably are dealing with, I don't know if it's a lot in my situation, but I hear from a lot of other targeted individuals. And I do think that, some subsonic and ultrasonic weapons are shot directly at the ears, right? I think a lot of targeted individuals are going through that. It doesn't seem like my attackers are shooting subsonic signals directly in my ear, but a lot of targeted individuals do experience that, and I do think that's a that's a very common protocol that I think with these remote platforms they can actually deliver ultrasonic streams of, I guess you'd call it a stream of, well, not a stream, I guess, well, sound is energy, but just basically an ultrasonic or subsonic wave or stream. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but y'all know what I mean.
That it could be all of these things. These are not mutually exclusive, and very often devices can in fact be manufactured that will combine one or more of these different types of phenomenon to induce a percussive effect. This is not foreign as well. We understand that during the 1970s and 1980s, a number of countries were examining the idea of electromagnetic pulse devices, sonic devices. Some of these have gone into sort of mass market production. Some of these are commercially available. Even today, as Dr. Balaban will illustrate to you, these are purchasable direct off the shelf. Moreover, we know that there have been a lot of dedicated efforts by nation states, and including from non-state actors, that have tried to work in this area primarily to create weapons of mass disruption. We see these being used, for example, with varying success on crowds, small aggregates of people, and against individuals. But the problem is very often.
Okay, so he just said it, right? So there we are again. He's mentioning us without mentioning us directly. And I want to just play it again. And on individuals, right? Individuals are being targeted by these weapons, by neuroweapons. People are working on this, right? And we know that it's contractors and subcontractors under the DoD. I think there are also probably some, like you got Black Cube and probably some American private corporations like Black Cube that take on clients, right? So if they have a person, like say they have a rich client who wants to look into somebody like Black Cube, you had Harvey Weinstein, and he wanted to harass those girls to get blackmail on them, shut them up so they didn't talk. So he hired Black Cube to use these weapons, surveillance weapons, basically integrated directed energy weapons used for surveillance and actually hurting them to intimidate them and to try and keep them quiet. Now, I think that Black Cube is not the only private mercenary group. I think that there are also some American, and I don't know the names of those. I need to research that more. But I really think there are some American versions of Black Cube, that rich clients can get to use these weapons and stuff on anybody that they want to. They hire them to surveil, harass, do V2K on them, remote neural monitoring, and things like that.
Commercially available. Even today, as Dr. Balaban will illustrate to you, these are purchasable direct off the shelf. Moreover, we know that there have been a lot of dedicated efforts by nation states, and including from non-state actors, that have tried to work in this area primarily to create weapons of mass disruption. And we see these being used, for example, with varying success on crowds, small aggregates of people, and against individuals. But the problem is very often The older technology.
He just says that so quickly. Did y'all notice that? He's a very keen speaker, and he always puts these things that he doesn't want people to really focus on, kind of at the end of the sentence, and on individuals, and on individuals. He says the other two things very clearly, and then on individuals, he's just a very sneaky speaker,
You required fairly large-scale devices to implement this. However, with the sophistication of the tools that we have, we're now able to see this being shrunk down, like so many other things. I'm looking at an audience of a group of people, a variety of ages. You remember those first cell phones? They're about the size of a Volkswagen. We felt really good. Yeah, I'm on the cell phone. You had to hold it like this. Now take a look at the size of the cell phones. What we see is compartmentalization and shrinkage of technology that increases its viability and utility of application. Next slide, please. This is where we're talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your inner ear. So if we're looking at the ear, take a look at the slide on the upper left, what we see is that the ear basically has an external meatus, this thing out here, and then there's a canal. There's a membrane, which is the tympanic membrane, the eardrum, to which connected a series of bones, which is called the ossicles. These things will move with a particular stiffness, which will then intrude onto the hearing organ, which is called the cochlea. So there are really two components of what the ear does. First is that the ear hears naturally. However, we also have to understand that the secondary component of what the ear does is the organs of balance and orientation. These are referred to as the vestibular apparatus, and they include the semicircular canals, or the three looping canals, and the saccule and ampule, as you see here. Now
the guy before James Giordano talked a lot about this. He talked about how the Cuban embassy workers, a lot of them had these huge balance problems, right? Like their brain was having trouble finding balance for their body. Just speaking, I don't want to speak for all targeted individuals, but I'm pretty sure, because I experience this a lot. When I get hit really hard and the tinnitus sound is very loud, like say I wake up and I've been tortured all night, I'll go to walk my dog and I walk like a zombie. My spine feels out of center. I'm kind of stumbling and stuff like that. My body's having a very, very hard time finding balance. So this is just a really what's the word for it? It's a huge, oh man, it's a huge problem caused by these weapons. Sorry about that, guys. Just getting hit very hard.
These are highly vulnerable organs to a number of different things. They're vulnerable to heat, they're vulnerable to pressure, they're vulnerable to sound. They're also exceedingly vulnerable to any other form of disruption that then cause a head trauma. So it's I bring that to you simply to tell you that these are exceedingly small structures that are exceedingly vulnerable to a variety of different injuries and insults. Moreover, take a look at the structure of the inner ear. The inner ear provides a mechanism by which a variety of different pulse stimuli can be amplified. Now, if we're looking at where damage can occur, particularly with regard to hearing loss, we're mostly looking at this larger organ here called the cochlea. It's a semi-stiff organ, there's fluid in the middle, and we know that various types of auditory stimuli can disrupt the cochlea and its function, shear the hair cells, induce damage. You would see hearing loss with that. Next slide, please. What types of pathologies would you see? You'd see inflammation, both locally and then more distally. You'd see hair cell damage and hair cell death. These are the organs, for example, in the cochlea that are sensitive to disruptions of the membrane that then transmit and transduce the necessary stimuli for hearing. You would see membrane scarring in any of the membranes that were affected. You begin to see neurological damage. And realistically, we know that we begin to see neurological damage as a consequence of two things. Number one, that the nerve itself is directly damaged because of some insult to the nerve. Or number two, we then begin to see is if you're damaging the sensory organs of the inner ear, you're seeing changes due to what's called excitotoxicity of the nerve. In other words, you're overstimulating that area of the inner ear. You're hyperstimulating the nerve. As the nerve becomes hyperstimulated, you then see a disruption of neurological calcium. And with a disruption of calcium, you then get something called excitotoxicity. Once that nerve becomes excitotoxic, characteristically, you begin to see changes occurring upstream. This is just basic neuropathology. Next, please.
So I just want to say, from what he said there, and I think a lot of targeted individuals know about this, but I just want to make sure that I say it here. It's very, very, these microwaves and what they're doing to our nervous system, what these electromagnetic frequencies are doing to our nervous system, it's very, very important. I'm sure a lot of you already know this, to take calcium with vitamin D, because the vitamin D will help you absorb the calcium, because this is really screwing up. It's really damaging the calcium in our body, in our cells, actually.
What type of thing can do this? Well, again, a host of drugs could do these types of things, but we have to rule these out because we're not seeing drug-like effect, number one. Number two, we didn't see a constellation of signs and symptoms from these individuals that would be suggestive of some type of toxicology. And number three, the long-term effects really do not match what you would tend to see with either cisplatin or organic toxins. So as a consequence of that, we can rule this out. Some of the early hypotheses were, well, perhaps these individuals were exposed to one or more of these compounds, either directly or indirectly. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. Might this have been a beta test where there was some priming or synergistic effect where individuals were exposed to low doses of these drugs? Yes, but these drugs are non-recoverable as well. Moreover, there didn't seem to be any other physiological signs that would suggest that these individuals received a high enough dose of these drugs to do the job. So we can rule these out. Next, please. What about sonic devices and or electromagnetic pulse and microwave devices? Well, there's a number of different things that could be done here. Realistically, what you see is either pulsatile photonic delivery of either sound pulse, particularly a hypersonic pulse, that would begin in the subsonic, then translate through the sonic and into the hypersonic range, and or you can engage some type of electromagnetic pulse, microwave pulsing, that could then affect the symptom in a very similar way, these signs and symptoms in very similar ways.
There we go.
Get overstimulation of hair cells, clearly with any type of sonic delivery. You would get hair cell fatigue, breakage, and death. You would get scarring and denervation. But you would also see that if in fact it was a hypersonic pulse and or an electromagnetic pulse, you would then begin to cause cavitation in anything that has a fluid medium in it, which would include any one of the vulnerable organs of the inner ear, the cochlea included, but most notably, those that would concentrate this type of an energy pulse most directly. In other words, an acoustic or an electromagnetic lens. Are there structures of the inner ear that can do this? Next slide, please. The auditory features you would see, if it were just limited to the auditory system, would be these. However, this was not noted, as you saw in the earlier data. We're ruling out the idea that this was just an auditory assault. Next slide, please. So if you're going to engage the diagnosis for this, and you're thinking, well, could there have been somebody with focused energy that would then produce the signs and symptoms that we're seeing in these individuals with the statistical significance as was demonstrated here? What might be the viability to do such a thing? Well, you heard that. Audiological testing suggests that indeed these individuals were exposed to something, but there's no long-term.
It's very frustrating because he knows, like he's very aware that the DoD is experimenting with these neuroweapons. He is the advisor to the Pentagon on neuroweapons. He knows they're being used on us. It's very frustrating, and I don't see how he can do it. So I just don't see how he can sit there and so confidently act like, oh, well, this is what it could be, it just really frustrates me.
Audiological or hearing changes. Pharmacological or toxicological recovery early on did not demonstrate that there was in fact any toxic substances or pharmacological poisoning. Cochlear imaging is difficult to do. Biopsy and forensic anatomy can certainly be done after the fact, but your most reliable tests are those that are used in neurosensory defect. Those tests that, as you saw earlier, will determine the function of those nervous systems that are involved in vestibular apparatus, balance, orientation, and position. In fact, that's exactly what we saw. However, there also seemed to be some mild cognitive changes that were initially somewhat high and then tapered off, and then some that were a little more progressive and that were more persistent. Is it possible, as you heard earlier, that the primary effect was localized to the inner ear and you're seeing secondary effects, what we call sequelae, where the individual's levels of cognition and emotional challenge were then disrupted by the fact that they were highly vertiginous? Yes, absolutely. I mean, look, in a previous life, I flew airplanes for a living. And I got to tell you, I mean, one of the things that happens if you put individuals in a spin or an unusual attitude, it's exceedingly disorienting. Pilots and aircrew are trained to be able to function cognitively and with emotional stability in unusual environments that disrupt their positional sense. You recognize that. One of the most curious phenomena is when an individual is exposed to either spinning or tumbling very often what you'll find is cognitive deficits that will persist for several minutes to hours after that exposure. The longer the exposure, the longer the cognitive deficits occur. What type of cognitive deficits? Most notably with regard to information transfer, information assimilation and synthesis, and the ability to then process information in a proactive way.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it almost makes sense. As you heard earlier from Dr. Hoffer, it obtains. The issue here is simple. If I have to concentrate very, very strongly on orienting my environment to what is up and what is moving around, it becomes exceedingly difficult to do anything else. I can tell you that one of the things we use very often is something called a Barani chair. We'll put an individual in a spinning chair and then we'll ask them to do various tasks, both during the spin and after the spin. And they become so disoriented as a consequence of a loss of their vestibular senses and their positional upright and or positional surround that their cognitive capabilities seem to be grossly impacted, almost to the point that you're now seeing this is a full cognitive defect. Now, clearly, when everything returns back to normal for these individuals, the cognitive defect then tapers, it diffuses or damps over time. But you do see similar phenomena with regard to cognitive blunting and cognitive defect in individuals who have profound Meniere's disease, which is an inflammation of the inner ear that then causes vestibular and semicircular disruption. Not only are these individuals positionally disrupted with vertiginous defect and dizziness, but they're also cognitively disrupted because the ability to process information, inclusive of things like upright orientation, interactions with others, then induces, as the neuroscientist Antonio Damasio says, a feeling of what happens. It is anxiogenic. It produces anxiety. If you've ever been dizzy, if you've ever had vertigo, you know that this is a very unsettling experience. And the phenomenon of that itself can be cognitively blocking. So could this be focused to the inner ear as a primary pathology that then causes secondary reactive or manifest changes in individuals' ability to process and engage cognitive information, transfer, and capability? Yes, certainly it could. But could it be more? Could it be that in fact you're also seeing an indirect or direct effect on the brain itself? Next,
direct effect.
This is the idea of targeting the brain by accessing the periphery. Is it possible that what we're seeing here is not only a form of traumatic neurological injury to the ear, but a communicating neurological injury that was then able to evoke indirect or direct effects on the brain? How might that happen? Well, again, there are a number of different things.
And guys, like as targeted individuals, I think we experience both. We're experiencing targeted, like, my attackers can target my memory. They can inject visuals. They can do all this stuff. So that's direct. It's direct. They mean to do that. But then also, stimulating the inner ear, stimulating the brain in the inner ear, in the nerves, the vestibular nerves in a negative way can also just create disorientation, right? And that's a byproduct of this, which our attackers will use to make us like have a worse memory as an indirect result, right? So as targeted individuals, we experience a lot of indirect damage from these attacks, but also very targeted, specific. Our attackers mean to hit the memory. They mean to hit the visual cortex. They are targeting those specific parts. But then we experience a lot of indirect effects from this, like, fatigue and our loss of balance, a loss of focus and things like that, which I'm experiencing a lot right now.
Can do this. We've talked about a variety of different pharmacological agents that can co-present with some initial ototoxic or otopathologic effects, but realistically are working more in the central nervous system. But once again, we can rule these out. The reason being is we're not seeing the recovery of these agents in blood, lymph, cerebrospinal fluid, nor are we seeing the constellation of effects in the brain that would be reflective and indicative of this type of pharmacotoxicology. However, if we then focus more on the devices, there are a number of different things that could work on the brain directly and or affect the brain indirectly by working through one or more of the sensory portals. These include sonic generators, electromagnetic pulse generators, and although not necessarily pertinent to this discussion, something I do want to bring to your attention is nanoparticulate matter. And this is becoming increasingly a problem because, as Jen Snow and I are working on, this is now aerosolizable. The idea of aerosolizable nanobots has become a reality. So the idea of being able to utilize nanoparticulate matter as a neuroweapon now has become, in fact, real. What are the possible mechanisms of effect?
It's not only possible, I mean, like, it's targeted individuals. In my research, in my experience, I know at least every American, I don't want to speak for every other country, but I would assume many other countries, almost every citizen in those countries is ingesting, breathing in, drinking nanoparticulates, food, water, air, with nanoparticulates that make us these little antennas, right? So that then the weapons directed energy, or even if you just had your computer or your phone on, that Wi-Fi energy from your phone and your computer is going to actually absorb more into your body. It's going to intensify those effects. So it's used in conjunction with the directed energy weapons. And we've talked about that a lot. A lot of targeted individuals have talked about that a lot.
Whereby you could get an indirect or direct action into what's called a supratentorial space, the space above the tentorial membrane, essentially the brain. Well, I think one thing that becomes exceedingly important to understand is that the brain is bathed in fluid. This is called cerebrospinal fluid. The brain is protected by a set of membranes called the meninges. And the meninges are basically threefold. The outermost and the most durable is called the dura mater. There's an in-between membrane that looks very much like the articulations of a spider web. In fact, it's called the arachnoidal membrane, and it is filled with fluid called subarachnoidal fluid. And then this interfaces directly with the surface of the brain, which is called the pia mater, the dear mother, literally. It's that layer right on top of the brain is very, very thin. The area of the subarachnoidal space is also a very richly vascular area. So what you now have is blood vessels that are interfacing with a fluid space existing in this kind of padded zone that looks like a spider web. So that particular structure itself might lend itself to some type of pressure damage and cavitation damage if we're looking at the meninges. But it's pretty hard to get those kind of waves at that level of effect through the skull. But what happens if you didn't have to go through the skull? What if you could go in the side door? What if you could create a pressure wave that was amplified through peripheral structures that could then be communicated directly up into the brain? Essentially what you're doing is now you don't have to storm the castle to go through the walls. You can literally sneak through the side doors and then go up to the parapets.
So what he did there, I just want to tell you guys, like, when I started talking to Dave Case and reading some of his interviews, this is where I learned of the actual protocol of streams of energy that conduct along the skin to the actual outer ear and then inner ear to the brain. So I would experience my attackers hitting me right in the back of the neck, right where the bottom of the skull meets the top of the neck. They'd shoot a wide beam of energy right there, and it would heat up on the back. Now, what I thought at the time, before I talked to Dave Case, before I learned some stuff from him, I thought that they were just, hitting me with an external hit. They were just trying to hurt my neck, right? But in actuality, they were trying to hurt my neck, but they were also shooting this stream of energy to the back of the neck where it was conducting along the skin, right? So they can have a stream of energy that hits the skin, conducts along it, or they can have fields that are actually conducting along the skin to the inner ear, to the outer ear, then to the inner ear, then to the brain, right? But then they can do it the other way too, to the brain, then goes to the inner ear. So when he says it's hard to get through the skull, if you do have nanoparticulates or nanotechnology that pass through the blood-brain barrier, it would go straight to those things. It would go straight to those things past the blood-brain barrier.
Let's go back to the inner ear. This is the inner ear. This is the brain. One more time. This is the inner ear. This is the brain. They live right next door to each other. They communicate. They communicate primarily through this region here, and this region here is called the ductus reunions, and this area here where there's an actual communication that goes from the inner ear space that contains fluid called perilymph into the brain is called the cochlear aqueduct. It is an aqueduct, but what I want you to take a look at is the size differential between this fairly large vestibular space, basically called here as the foraminal area, the opening area, sometimes referred to as the foyer, and the brain space. See the tube? This tube essentially works as a venturi. It communicates fluid between these two spaces. One of the things we worry about, for example, for an inner ear infection is the communication of that infection into the brain space that then would produce a meningitis.
Does that tube have a name? I don't remember if he, let's see if he.
But if we create a pressure wave here, we can disrupt the internal structures in two ways. Number one, primarily by amplifying it through the Venturi effects of creating cavitation in this structure here called the ductus reunions, which then affect the saccule, the ampullus here, utriculus, and or by then creating an effect that would then communicate upward into the brain space by creating a cavitational wave that goes up through the cochlear aqueduct directly into the cerebrospinal fluid. Now recall, the cerebrospinal fluid bathes the brain. So what you would tend to see is injuries that occur in and around the space beginning here that could then cause a more disruptive effect as you actually disrupt the flow of this fluid. This fluid moves. Any cavitation in this fluid is going to be disruptive, and it can create something which is known as a communicating hydrocephalus. So now what's happening is you're actually getting a change in the level of the fluid because of bubble expansion, bubble collapse. This continues to communicate. It doesn't disrupt the flow of that fluid, but it can produce neurological sequelae, both short-term and long-term. The other thing that that can then do is that can produce a lot of change in the way the brain resorbs its blood flow, because this particular mechanism also affects the way blood is exchanged between the brain space and the vascular space. But the vascular space is also a portal by which peripheral disruption can then lead to central disruption. Next slide, please. So clearly, if we're looking at the paralymphatics, we can see that, once again, disruption of the paralymphatics, as we said earlier, can communicate into the brain space. It can also communicate up here into the subarachnoidal space, because we know that the paralymph will communicate with the CSF via that particular aqueduct. But once again, we have blood vessels that are embedded within this subarachnoidal membrane that then interface directly with the substance of the brain. If we disrupt that fluid around the brain, could we then create a disruptive pressure wave by cavitation into these blood vessels that would then be communicated into the brain space by both the paralymphatic CSF communication and the blood space? Yes, we can. These things are essentially talking together. Next slide. So if we look at these communications, what we can see is that any type of communication here into the subarachnoid space is capable of inducing a variable pressure wave, a cavitation wave, inclusive of cavitation damage, at a variety of different brain locales. We know that one of the things that this can then do is that can actually disrupt the integrity of the tissue, because you're now increasing two things. Number one, localized pressure, which then actually creates a traumatic event, which can then lead to axonal shearing, and vascular effects, which can then disrupt the blood flow to the brain. Disrupted blood flow to the brain can then lead to microhemorrhagic infarcts, small level blood flow disruption, small areas of necrosis in the brain, and this would then be more long-term. So clearly, one way we could affect the brain through the inner ear is through the fluid medium that occurs via the inner ear directly to the subarachnoid space, affecting the fluid medium that surrounds the brain and thereby causing a disruption to the brain structure directly. We can also affect the blood, and there's a number of different ways we can affect the blood. Certainly, we can engage the inner ear, and most of the pathology we're seeing here with this embassy encephalopathy would suggest that the inner ear provides for us an acoustic or some other form of energetic lens. Is going to concentrate this type of information, create a disruption primarily in the vestibular area in and around the foyer that would then affect the saccule and the ampullus. This would then disrupt the function of the inner ear. This could produce a cognitive constellation, but at the same time could have a secondary disruptive effect where it's now creating a cavitation wave that spreads throughout the paralymphatic fluid, communicates via Venturi effect up into the cerebrospinal fluid space, disrupts the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid in the subarachnoidal space, and thereby can also disrupt the vasculature. But could you disrupt the vasculature directly? Could you incur cavitation changes in some area of the vasculature that's going to affect both the inner ear and the brain? Oh, yes, you can. This is the area in and around the inner ear. And what we can see is that there is a direct concentration of blood vessels. Once again, take a look at the upper left-hand portion of the slide. This shows the arterial supply to the inner ear, the utricle and the saccule. This is supplied by the anterior vestibular artery, which forms a direct connection to the basilar artery, which then communicates to the cerebral arteries, most notably the middle cerebral artery. The middle cerebral artery branches up into the brain, and that's what's called here is this lacunar effect. In other words, there are these deep penetrating arteries that go into the brain space. These are exceedingly small vessels, and the concentration of pressure within these vessels is exceedingly important to maintain a variety of neurological responses and cerebrovascular responses. These things will change as a consequence of local pressure, and they'll alter the blood flow to maintain stable pressures across the brain space. The brain is highly vulnerable to these types of things. But if you disrupt the flow of arterial blood, you're going to get two things. Number one, you get a compensatory arterial response, and you're going to see changes in perfusion that will occur on the vascular side. if this occurs as a consequence of bubbles, which you're essentially producing here is microemboli. Can the microemboli lodge here in these lacunar vessels to create lacunar infarcts, microstrokes? Yes, indeed they can.
Yeah, I'm not chiming in here, guys, because all this is very complicated to me. You know, and I'm not sure how much the blood flow. You know, it does seem like my attackers can give me these horrible migraines and actually control blood flow to the brain. But you know, all this stuff that he's talking about is pretty complicated to me. So I was just going to let him talk here until he gets to a important point but he's hitting on a very specific thing and specific things that the Cuban embassy workers present with. So this is just a small little slice of what electromagnetic pulses or microwaves, ultrasonic and subsonic things can do to the brain. Just a small little slice of it.
You get disruption of the brain space directly by disrupting the arachnoidal membrane, by disrupting the fluid that exists in the arachnoidal membrane, by disrupting the fluid of the paralymph in the ear. Yes, you can. Can you do both at the same time? You betcha. What would the effect be? Well, clearly, if you're disrupting the inner ear directly by affecting the foyer, by affecting the utricle and the saccule, by virtue of a pressure wave, then create some type of cavitation within those structures that are fluid-filled structures, you're going to disrupt otolithic effects and you're going to get a change in the balance organs and balance function. Could that lead to problems with regard to cognitive processing? Absolutely. Based upon the structure of the inner ear, could you also then begin to cause neurological changes and neurological damage? Yes, that's a possibility as well. You could certainly begin to cause degenerative changes at the innervation of the inner ear that could communicate along the cranial nerves to then have a neurodegenerative change. Is this easy to determine? Not necessarily, but certainly it could be done by virtue of certain types of imaging and certain types of nerve conduction velocity testing. But what if you didn't have to affect the nerve itself and you can get directly into the brain? The same pressure wave that would affect the utriculus and the saccule could indeed create a pressure wave with inside that foyer that would affect two components that would directly and indirectly assess the brain. The first direct effect being the communication through the paralymph of cavitation disruptions that then enter through the cochlear aqueduct to perfuse the subarachnoidal space and cause a disruption in cerebrospinal fluid. And the second, which would be a disruption of the vasculature here in the arterial blood supply that would then communicate back to the basilar artery and communicate up with cavitation and the blood flow to the brain. So what you see here is converging pathologic effects, disruptive pathologic effects. Next slide, please. How would you look to assess these types of things? You've already heard this. I'm not going to repeat the information. Dr. Hoffer's group did a wonderful job in neurocognitive testing, neuroimaging. Clearly, if you wanted to look a little more deeply, you'd have to take a look at some of the forensic anatomy upon biopsy, necropsy. But you could also model some of this work, vivo, in vitro, and with computer simulations, which becomes probably the most accurate way to take some simulacrum in a phantom or in some other type of situation that would then model what these effects would be on the mammalian ear and on the mammalian brain. Of course, for that, our next speaker, Dr. Balaban, will discuss some of the work that he's done to empirically demonstrate what these findings not only are, but what they could be based upon not only the type of image we see here, but the type of image that we would then see if we were to increase the frequency or change some of the electromagnetic pulsing. Next slide, please. So, based upon that, what's the take-home messages I have for you? Like anything else, let's go through a process of elimination. We have to go about this somewhat deductively, because we have a set of individuals who've suffered these particular constellation of signs and symptoms, and we recognize that from that, these are the things we're seeing. What types of changes could we be seeing in the peripheral and central organs, neurosensory organs, and in fact the brain that might be indicative of this, and what could do it? Is it possible that drugs alone could have done that? Well, early on in our discussion, we ruled that out. Is it possible that ultrasonics could do this? Yes, this is very likely and highly probable. Is it possible that electromagnetic pulsing, microwave pulsing, in some way could do that? Very possible, highly probable. Is it also possible there be some combinatory approach, beta test, if you will, to see if we give drug first at a low dose or ultrasonic?
My power is going out. Okay, hopefully my power won't go out here. I had a little 2 brownouts right there. Wait, let's go back a little bit. This is very important. Oh, my lights keep going out.
Well, early on in our discussion, we ruled that out. Is it possible that ultrasonics could do this? Yes, this is very likely and highly probable. Is it possible that electromagnetic pulsing, microwave pulsing, in some way could do that? Very possible, highly probable. Is it also possible there may be some combinatory approach, a beta test, if you will, to see if we give drug first at a low dose or ultrasonics at a low dose coupled with some type of electromagnetic pulse microwave dosing in some combinatory form, could these be worked?
See, that's very sly what he did there, because he knows that's methods of which they experiment with these weapons in combinations with certain toxins, electromagnetic pulses or microwaves, and then ultrasonics too. And I would guarantee, I saw Brian too is in the chat, and I think Brian too, I think his attackers do a lot of stuff to him, but I think they actually are using ultrasonics directly to the ear, directly to both ears, as well as doing, you know, microwave hearing and things like that. And I think a lot of targeted individuals, you know, experience that. But they, wow, my power just keeps threatening to go out, and it hasn't done this ever. All right, but let's let Dr. Giordano kind of wrap up this presentation.
Quite possible with very positive explanatory value. In other words, if someone put a gun in my ear and said, which one do you think is going to produce this constellation of effects that we saw in those individuals who are most affected, not only in Cuba, but more recently in China, I would tend to think that what you're probably finding is this last one. Whether or not drugs or some other form of pharmacotoxicologic agent we use, I think remains dubious, but certainly there are devices that are widely available that we also know have been dedicated activities in the neuroweapon space by a variety of nation states that would be capable of doing just this type of thing. The inner ear provides a locus, forum, for this to then be conducted in such a way to manifest these effects, but it's not the inner ear alone. It could occur through the sinuses, both the ethmoid and the sphenoid sinuses. Right. It could occur through the hard palate of the mouth. Any one of the vulnerable amplifying spaces of the head could do it. And certainly what becomes important is how such a weapon could then be focused and utilized in those ways to be able to create this effect. Might it be, once again, that this was something that was serendipitous, stochastic, that this was some type of vermin protecting agent or device that was typically in those rooms which these individuals were then suspect? Perhaps. Is that likely? Not very.
Okay.
The reason for that would be that many others would have these signs and symptoms. One. Number two, there would be some engineering artifact that would then be attributable. Here's the device, this is what it was being used for, and there would be an attribution or custodial record for that. Absent that, once again, by virtue of implication, this is intentional, this is directed, this seems to be a beta test of some type of a viable neuroweapon that utilizes one or more of these modalities for its effect. Next slide.
Boom. So he just dropped a truth bomb right there. This is directed, it's intentional, and some kind of neuroweapons device.
That's all I have for you. Clearly, what I'd like to leave you with is speculation. Speculation based upon the facts of the case, speculation based upon what we know about the weaponology, or at least the deviceology, speculation about what we know about what the pathology is and could be, and how this would work. So what I'm asking you to do is something quite simple. Take the facts of the case based upon the findings that were presented to you by Dr. Hoffer. I want you to take the level of possibility and probability in terms of what the viable structures are that could communicate such effects in real life terms. And then pair that, if you will, to our next set of speakers, who will not only talk about what the empirical findings are that could reproduce this in a modeled scenario, but how this could also be leveraged geopolitically with regard to the viability of an increasing capability, confidence, and consideration in neuroweaponology. Thank you.
Yep. And the guy who spoke before James Giordano, Dr. Hoffer, I want to throw this in before I end the live stream, guys. Ella did she had a call the other night where this lady, a targeted individual named Jax, JX, actually saw Dr. Hoffer, and she has V2K. She has severe V2K, kind of like me, like a lot of you guys out there. And I think it was Dr. Hoffer that she saw. I'm not sure. It was Hoff something. So I'm kind of assuming that it was this doctor. I have to go back and listen. Maybe somebody can type it in chat, can confirm that. But she said that the doctor she went to see, and I think it was Dr. Hoffer, said that he knew about these weapons. He knew about V2K and all this stuff. So I wanted to mention, I may do a separate video on this. He was recommending to her for V2K that she get a noise canceling hearing aid. So I'm going to be trying that. That's something I'm definitely going to try, because a hearing aid uses a certain frequency to cancel out sound in the outer and inner ear, right? So for anybody with a B2K, I think a very hopeful thing in something that I think this actual guy who did the first presentation that I didn't show recommended to a targeted individual to get a noise canceling hearing aid. So I'm definitely going to be trying that, and I'll let y'all know about that. Now I'm gonna do another presentation probably this weekend on if they show the guy. Let's see if they they don't have his name. Let me see if it's the beginning. Okay, yeah. Dr. James Canton. I think it's Dr. James Canton. His presentation is just mind blowing. I mean, he talks about these neuroweapons, how they're being used in consumer markets, how they're being used by the military, how they're being used everywhere. So I do want to go over that presentation too. They just seem to be the most important presentations to me. However, all of these presentations are super important, guys. So I put the link for this video in the description. You guys go check it out in full. And they say a lot of things. This is backing up a lot of what targeted individuals are talking about. And as a matter of fact, if you read in between the lines in a lot of these presentations, they mention us. You know, they mention people being targeted by these weapons, by these technologies. And obviously, it's not a huge leap, right? That if these weapons were being used in Cuba, even if it was like, you know, and this is total speculation. Even if it was Russia who maybe gave weapons to Cuban intelligence, or China that gave weapons to Cuban intelligence, or maybe it was Russia who actually hit the American embassy workers with these weapons. Now, if any of those, like if Cuba, China, or Russia are using these weapons, then it's not a leap at all to understand and know for sure the United States of America, the Department of Defense, the Pentagon are experimenting with these weapons. And then when you take into account what all targeted individuals are saying about these technologies and what's happening to them, it becomes very obvious. It becomes very, very obvious that what we are saying is definitely true and that this experimentation needs to stop. Okay, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and stop it there because I wanted to make it as succinct as possible. But after, you know, I'm probably gonna make the next video I make. I may make a video in between about the hearing aid thing. But then I'm gonna go through the other guy's presentation, and then after that, I'll do like a live stream where we just talk and y'all can bring up questions or whatever y'all want to look up. But I do want to keep this short, guys, just so it's pretty concise. Such important information, and I'll definitely read what y'all wrote in chat and everything. Y'all always write very, very intelligent stuff. You know, thank you for your comments, and just stay strong. So much information is coming out on this, and I also wanted to let y'all know, it may already be going on, but I think Dr. Horton was saying that she was going to have Kevin and Ned on tonight. She's doing a lot of work right now, and I'm trying to get my affidavit done. It's daunting, but I'm trying to get that done so I can, you know, either work with targeted justice or try to go in an individual direction, or both, you know, or both. But I love you guys. Stay strong. I just wanted to bring out this very important information, and I'll do another live stream soon on the other presentation that I thought was just super important. He even says some more telling things than Dr. G. Adorno says about neuroweapons and directed energy weapons. So, all right, guys, I love y'all, and I'll see y'all on the next one.